cool. All right, what's up, everybody? This is another episode that is centered around sports cards, and I wanted to bring somebody else on who I consider someone who's been in a profession. I don't want to say profession, but the hobby long enough to, provide some
I wish it
clarity.
was a profession.
Yeah, I mean, the way it looks like people are turning it into one, but just somebody who's been in the hobby long enough to actually speak on it and provide insight to people like me who are still learning, and to anybody else who's looking to get in on the hobby. I want to first shout out Mr. Gellman for jumping on here today, and everybody who is on Twitter who is engaging with sports cards as well. Some of the people on my podcast before, I want to give you all a shout out. The rest of our community, I want to give you all a shout out. Everybody who's pretty much around this I guess new wave of art, I would say. Thank y'all. So I have Gellman on today. Gellman, I guess we can start off by, just providing a little bit of background for me
Sure.
to understand, where you come from as far as sports cards, and
Yeah.
just to help everybody else understand who you are.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to do that, and thanks for having me on. I love talking shop with people. It's so much fun to kind of get different perspectives and get sort of different stories. And I love kind of getting on and talking with people about, things that I love and I'm passionate about. And I've been involved with sports cards now for, I want to say 30 years. I'm almost 40. And I remember growing, yeah, exactly. You made it.
Yeah.
So I remember going to the card shop when I was a little kid, and I grew up I reached an age that I can remember in the early '90s and late '80s, right when the '90s collecting boom really sort of took off. And if you remember back, that was the first time in the '90s where sports cards were really valuable, right? So you're talking about those Mickey Mantles and the Jackie Robinson cards and Satchel Paige and the Honus Wagner first sort of started up, and like that was really like the first time that collectors really sort of understood there was insane amount of value in a lot of these collectibles. So it sparked this boom of collecting where people wanted to get their version of those cards to pass to their kids 30, 40, 50 years down the road. Now, funny enough, we are 30, 40 years down the road from that, and a lot of those cards are about worth as much as the cardboard that they're printed on. So they're not, they were just a wave of overproduction. But I grew up in that era, and when I went to college and stuff, I kept up with it. But I'll preface everything by saying I'm not really a card collector. Cards are just a vehicle to collect autographs, which is really where I have focused so much of my energy. My dad, when he was younger, and he grew up in the 50s and 60s, used to collect autographs from presidents, and he would write to the Oval Office, and he would do all this other stuff. So he really got into it. And as a result, I saw his collection when I was young, and I was like, I want to have that just like my dad. And so for the last 30 years, I've been keeping tabs on it. But within the last probably 15 years, I was an English major in college, loved creative writing, loved to write and stuff like that. So I've actually started a blog back before blogs were really a thing, and started writing about sports cards. And
Yeah, nice blog, by the way. Nice blog. I checked it out.
I got it all fixed. I haven't gone back to it in a while. I got it all fixed this morning. So, but I started a blog in 2007, and I really wanted to provide a different perspective, because for a lot of times people were going to sports cards and looking, hey, I want to find out how much my card is worth. That was the primary mode of engagement with hobby media. And that led them to one source in particular, which was Beckett. And the Beckett's with the price guides and everything, everybody knows those. There was always that history. And I wanted to provide a different perspective on it, because I didn't look at the hobby back then as rainbows and lollipops. I wanted to give the raw, uncensored view of what my thoughts were going into it. And there were some things that were going down that I commented on, and it gained me a huge following. And I ended up becoming one of the most widely read sports card blogs on the internet. That wasn't the.
I don't want to cut you off, but I saw something in the blog where you said that sports cards don't need to be graded or something like that. It was
God, yeah, we'll get into that. So I think what really drove my love for getting to this point was the writing, and it just kind of formed relationships within the industry. I was able to get exposure to things that normal collectors really weren't, because I interacted with people in the industry all the time. Now, once I started having kids, my time became much more limited. So I haven't
Understandable.
put as much time into the blog recently. But I remember for a couple of years there, I was posting 3-4 times a day. Probably I had 1,000 readers a day. This was before really Twitter caught on. It was mostly just grassroots through message boards and stuff, people finding my site. And, I kind of took an adversarial approach with a lot of the standards in the hobby because I just saw the gross underbelly of
Mhm.
anytime money is involved, there are people that want to take advantage of other people. So, that's where I focused a lot of my energy and made me a lot of enemies. I'm not going to lie, but
Enemies are
I've had
good
a lot
though.
of
Enemies
yeah,
are good.
I've had a lot of exposure. So yeah, my website is sportscardsuncensored.com. I haven't really done a lot of updating that. I still write, but just not as much as I used to.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, man. That's for everybody. That was Gellman, his historic background on sports cards. I just wanted to give y'all some insight on who we were talking to before we delved in. But so let's talk. Let me ask you this question too, because I asked Rob the same question.
Sure.
Rob England,
Yeah.
even though he collects um sports cards that are cemented in history as being,
Yeah.
prime, but like always going to be like the hottest
Iconic.
sports,
Yeah.
iconic sports cars.
Yeah.
Um, you have a different approach talking about your perspective again about going into the modern collecting and
Yeah.
and transitioning over to new superstars and whatnot. But
Yeah.
before, let me ask you this: do you think sports cars right now are as hot as they are, or hot as they were at the time, at the prime as they were back then, at this current time?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's a
perfect.
great question. And I'm glad you asked it because it's actually probably the largest boom in sports cards history is going on right now.
So this
And
is the
I would,
best time.
this is the best time in the history of sports cards.
Mm,
And, it's all in relation to a few different, I mean, there's probably 5 or 6 contributing factors as to why that is what it is. But I will tell you, I've never seen in the history of sports cards, and I've, being a student of everything that I love, I've gone back and tried to get as much information as I can. I've never seen anything like this happen in
mm.
history. So,
What are some of the things that are contributing to that right now?
yeah,
Because when I'm looking at it, I guess from my viewpoint, the older generation are the people who have the money. Is it the older generation spending money on new sports cards? Like what's currently happening? What are those factors that are
yeah,
contributing to this recent boom?
great question. So it started at the beginning of the pandemic era, but I'll take it a step further than that. Vintage, yeah, we're all
Age.
there.
How many of us have them?
Right, exactly.
I'm about to pick.
Uh,
We'll have a special guest in a moment.
yeah. Um, so sports cards started to tick up, I would say about 10, 15 years ago, where kind of those iconic cards that Rob was talking about really started to find an investment potential with people who, had nostalgic reactions to, their childhood of going through with cards and have decided, what, I've got a lot of money now. I want to start buying those cards that were always unattainable for me.
Mm,
And so for a while, cards like the vintage Mickey Mantles, the Babe Ruths, the iconic cards of our generation, even the Tom Brady's too, like going into the more modern stuff, people have started to bring those values higher and higher and higher. And then once the pandemic hit, it sparked a brand new phase of collecting, which is people no longer had disposable income that they were throwing at trips or going out to eat or going to the bar. So like, well, I've got all this money now. I make, 6 figures a year, 7 figures a year. I want to start buying things that are fun, and because I can't go on trips anymore because of COVID. So they
gotcha.
started buying cards. There was also a factor where the government sent everybody $600 to $1,200, and people are like, well, I can be unhappy and have $600 in my pocket and pay my bills, or I can be unhappy and buy some sports cards and make myself a little bit more happy. So most
I
people
got you.
didn't spend it on their bills; they spent it on cards. So it really sort of sparked this initial climb up a steeper mountain in terms of value trajectory, and then the shit kind of hit the fan a little bit when investors like Gary Vaynerchuk, some of the larger collector groups, and celebrities of all people, Kevin Durant, Mark Wahlberg, Logan Paul,
Deshaun
decided,
Watson.
Deshaun Watson, yep, they're all part of that group that bought golden auctions. They started investing and talking about investing in cards across their social media platforms, across, their follower bases and stuff like that. So all of a sudden you saw this meteoric rise of sports card values that have never happened before, because all of a sudden you're starting to see people just pour money into this stuff. So everything started to go up. Now, conversely with wrestling, because that's kind of the subject here, it was like in a weird period of time for wrestling, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. But from a sports card perspective, this is unlike anything anybody has ever seen in the history of sports cards, guaranteed.
Yeah, let's talk about wrestling real quick. Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for sharing that. With wrestling, as far as that market goes for sports cards, from what I've been seeing, from my observation, looking at NBA, NFL, the wrestling industry, as far as sports cards, they don't have the same amount of cards that are being produced in relation to the NBA. Now, why is that? Is it because the NBA is more popular, so it's trying to keep up with demand, or?
So it has to do with licensing. And so right now there is an exclusive license in all four major sports. So NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL all have exclusive licenses. Wrestling is no different. Same with the UFC, MMA, it's all exclusive licenses, because for a long time trading cards were seen as like a small avenue of money. They weren't really the most profitable piece. So the leagues wanted to limit their focus on how many people they had to deal with to get these trading card people to leave them alone and let them focus on real licensing, like jerseys and shirts and hats and whatever.
I got you.
So Topps owns the WWE exclusive license. And as a result of the negotiation that I'm sure they did with WWE, and I don't know this specifically, I'm guessing, but I have a lot of experience with this, they've probably negotiated an amount of products that are supposed to come out every year. And because it's such a niche audience, and because it's such a smaller audience than something like NBA, you're seeing that there's a ton of products that would be created for like football, but only a small handful of products that would be created for wrestling.
Let me ask you this: is since there is a smaller market for wrestling, does that mean there is a greater opportunity for investment in wrestling? As far as, say, if there's a small group of, I guess, high net worth individuals who collect wrestling art and things of that nature, is there an opportunity to, I guess, thrive in wrestling more than it would be in the NBA based on the market size in itself, if that makes sense?
Well, I'll say this. The licenses that have international appeal have greater potential for investment success. So NBA is a global sport, especially in Asia and Japan and other places. There is a huge contingent of NBA fans that drive that market as much as the U.S. does. U.S. is still the primary market, but from an EMEA perspective, Europe and Middle East and Asia, there is a huge contingent of fans. So those licenses have more potential. Now, I'll argue wrestling has that same international appeal. The difference is, I don't know how many of those people are looking at modern wrestling as the next big thing, but I'll say it wouldn't be the first time that a niche license has exploded. If you look at soccer, the soccer card market has almost gone to 100 times what it was. Now, soccer, again, international license, but small collector base. However, because of the sheer number of people that wanted to buy a small number of products, the value has, or the demand has far outweighed the supply. And those prices have gone through the roof. We're starting to see it with UFC cards. UFC cards have started to increasing exponentially. Vintage wrestling, which I'm sure you talked about with Rob, has gone to an insane degree because I contribute to a combination of the sports card boom in general, but also because there's a high investment rate of people who want to relive the nostalgia of their youth, which for a lot of us involves the Attitude Era and Hulk Hogan and so on and so forth.
So let me ask you, I don't mean to cut you off. So going back to, I guess, the original question I asked, if there is a smaller group of high net worth individuals in wrestling, that means that the potential for the market to shift greater is a lot easier than it would be if, say, NBA
to a degree. Yeah, to a degree. I don't think that the key to this is high net worth individuals. I think the key to this is exposure and and probably like this hive mind that's sort of taken over sports cards, where you have a group of investors that say the next big thing is this, and then everybody goes and jumps on that thing. So like we've started to see that with the vintage wrestling already, the Rocks rookie cards, the stuff from the late 90s. There's trivia games that all of a sudden cost $2,000 a piece. Like those types of things are all resulting from the popularity of wrestling in the mainstream, with the new Rock show, with the new Hulk Hogan movie that's coming out. Those are events that are driving interest in the market, similar to what you saw with Spider-Man comic books when the movie first came out in the early part of the 2000s. But you combine that with this wave of interest that's coming to sports cards, and it's a perfect storm.
So let me ask you this: why is it? I guess because I talked to Rob, and Rob only collects vintage wrestling cards. I guess from this era that he grew up in. Now that is one perspective. Now this might be a little bit more reassuring for me, because I have collected a few wrestlers that I believe in now that could be legends in the future. I got one right here. I got two actually. I got Randy Orton, and then I got Charlotte Flair. And these two, I believe, and these are PSA 10s, and I think these two have a tremendous upside. Granted, being that who they are. Why? I guess reassure me on why it might be beneficial to start collecting these modern sports cards as a investment as far versus I guess the vintage one.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the reason is because it's relatively untapped right now. So like one of the ways that people have made so much money on things like soccer cards or UFC is they got in when the boxes cost $10 a piece, and now they cost $1,000. So like, and I'm not talking about 5 years ago. I'm talking about 11 months ago. Gotcha. So like you're looking at 100x value increases over that time frame, which is unheard of in any stock market other than GameStop stock. This is the only thing that this has ever happened to. And it's all because of this newfound popularity. Pokemon cards, again, boxes used to cost $100. Now they cost $800.
Right.
Same things are happening all over the place. So for modern wrestling, it's a little bit different because you're dependent on the current product being good. So like the current WWE shows being good, in also combination with the products being good themselves, the sets. I think people like Charlotte Flair and Randy Orton, obviously they've already established their legacy within the business. I mean, that's undeniable. But funny enough, they're not the most valuable people to collect. They're just not.
Right.
And the reason is because modern WWE collecting is driven by a couple of questionable things. And some of them I agree with, some of them I don't.
Feel free to elaborate on those questionable things too, because that'll help everybody who's listening.
So modern wrestling cards are dominated by women, and they're dominated by women because of a number of reasons that some I agree. What? Yeah.
Shout out to women.
Exactly. So, and I collect Becky Lynch. She's my primary PC. So, I mean, I'm part of this group that values what the women are bringing to the table. I love Becky Lynch for one reason and one reason only. It's just because she's the modern day Stone Cold Steve Austin. That's what drew me to her. For a lot of other collectors, they collect women that are good looking, and they collect women that they feel attracted to, and that's what drives the value. And I don't personally agree with that because I find that kind of weird.
I understand.
But that's what drives the market.
But yeah, right.
Now there's exceptions to the rule, obviously, but it's a reason why people like Randy Orton's autograph goes for $25, and people like Alexa Bliss's autograph go for $125. Because of the perception of how collectors engage with the individual superstars. Now, it's somewhat perpetuated by the product on TV. It's also somewhat perpetuated by the way WWE markets their women. But I think, for me personally, the women's storylines are sometimes the best storylines that are going in the company.
Especially with Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair right now.
Exactly right. Like, she's the most compelling, that story, and Bianca winning the Rumble and Sasha, that's coming together as that storyline is the most compelling part of their TV product right now. Now, you'll see Sasha Banks has a huge amount of value in the WWE market because she's a good-looking woman who has a history and a pedigree of championship sort of wins and stuff like that. So that's what kind of drives the WWE card market in the modern sense. In the vintage sense, it's all about grading. and it's all about high grade because it's all junk wax.
So you're saying grading doesn't matter at this point in time?
Not for modern wrestling.
I got you.
But for vintage, it's everything. And there's a specific reason why that's the case. And it's because and when I was talking about the 80s and 90s and growing up, those boxes were produced in the millions, right? So when you look at
junk wax, we talking
junk wax, exactly. Yeah. Right. So I mentioned that earlier. Junk wax cards were junk. So you open them, you put them in a binder, you gave them to your kids, whatever. Your kids were the ones that were opening them. And a lot of them just never survived in the type of condition that would necessitate a high grade. Now, personally, I think grading is another subject for another podcast, but I don't agree with it. But I think from that perspective, if you're trying to build a vintage wrestling collection, it has to be built around high grade junk wax cards. And personally, I just don't identify with that.
Like the All-Stars. You mean like those All-Star
exactly.
Cards?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you, and that's why those cards in high grades are worth as much as they are, because they were never thought of as the valuable pieces until 11 months ago. Literally, this was that recent.
I got you.
So it's crazy.
Yeah.
Some people just got hit with the lucky stick way too hard.
So if I wanted to be Bianca Belair, I value your opinion. I value your expertise because it's all starting to make sense. So if I wanted to buy a Bianca Belair card, you're saying that I don't necessarily need to have it graded.
Correct.
So who are the I guess I kind of got a sense of who the people who buy sports cards are from back then. You know, those are the high paid people with the nice jobs now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
The people who used to collect and who, are jumping back in. But what about now? Like, who are these people now? Like,
so I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups. I'm a moderator on one of the Facebook groups that has, a couple thousand members on the site. And the majority of them are, my age, male collectors. There's a smattering of female collectors as well, but they're usually in their 30s or 40s, and they're spending, the typical, like I would say,
they actively watch WWE right now.
Correct. Yeah.
All right, got you.
Yeah.
I'll continue. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was just
no. I would say those are really the types, like the stereotypical sort of collector you would have is like a middle-aged, balding man like myself. That's who is the standard sort of target market for trading cards now these days because of the cost of the boxes.
Gotcha.
It's now that type of person all over again. And I would actually say wrestling is probably where sports cards were in general, like 12-14 months ago, where boxes were, you can get a box for $100 and you get, you rip open the packs and you collect the rare cards, and that's it. That's not what sports cards are anymore. Now every box costs $500 to $800, depending if it cost $50 before or $100 before. It's all 10x, 100x cost now for all sports cards. Wrestling is really the last bastion of cards that are pretty much where they were. So
let's look at the forecast real quick. Since it is the hottest it is right now, that means everything that's up must come down. How long do you see these sports cards being hot? Is it like when the pandemic's over, like we back to normal, or like what's going on with them?
It's kind of a toothpaste in the tube situation in a lot of ways. I'd say for the velvet rope area of the hobby, right? So the people that are in the champagne room, they're going to be in the champagne room for a very long time. So I think if you're thinking about buying into cards that are 5 figures today, they will continue to be 5 figures even when everybody's back in whatever they were doing before the pandemic.
I got you.
Now it may settle, but you have to remember the trajectory of these cards was already heading in that direction. It was just doing it much more slowly. And I think this was just kind of that once in a lifetime black swan event that just sort of spikes everything up the mountain. For WWE, I think you're going to see I think they're coming behind, and there's a unique situation why that happened. So for a long time into this pandemic, so it started, everybody was done in February of last year, right? That's when everything really sort of hit where it was now. Topps had only released one product. It was Road to WrestleMania. It came out in January of 2020. There was not a readily accessible product that was released under Topps WWE banner until September of that year. So it was 9 months in between releases. And as a result, in between those two sort of points was this giant spike, but there was no WWE product to exist within that spike because nothing was being released thanks to COVID. So yeah, it's a unique situation. I think WWE is slowly kind of following along with the rest of sports cards. We're seeing some crazy prices for some of the rarest, most desirable modern cards now. But overall, I would say that trajectory is probably a year or two, and then we'll probably see it settle back down. I don't see WWE staying this where it is in the modern sense, where it is right now. I think it'll eventually come back down the other side of the mountain. The vintage stuff could be different because there's not a lot of it. There's a small supply. Now, PSA right now has a backlog of millions of cards. So the chance that there are more of those vintage cards that are driving these 5-figure sales in line at PSA to be graded and will add to the demand or add to the supply to counter the demand, I think that's a pretty likely scenario. So you could see those values dip a little bit as more of the high grade stuff comes into existence.
Got you. Oh, damn. Well, I'm gonna cut this one because my son he's starting to
you're good.
Starting to wake up. But I think that was a valuable conversation. I think we hit 30 minutes. I think that was a valuable 30 minutes for anybody who's looking to invest or people who are already investing. This was Gellman. I want to give him a big shout out again for stopping by and providing his expertise in the community. Shout out to Twitter too. Everybody there is doing a great job. Let's keep engaging with each other and keep educating each other and keep learning all at the same time. This is Gary Foods from the Rolling Pin Podcast. Son, I'm coming. And, y'all have a great one.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything you want to say? Before we get up out of here.
No, you can follow me on Instagram at WWE Gellman, Gellman, and my Twitter handle is at SCUncensored. And just hop on there, engage with me. I'm pretty open book and happy to answer any questions.
All right, y'all. Peace.